Welcome to one of the most unsettling stories ever recorded in Savannah, Georgia. The year was 1839, a time when Savannah was still known as the Jewel of the South. Its streets were lined with oak trees heavy with Spanish moss, their shadows stretching across cobblestone paths. The warm, damp air carried rumors that moved from the grand mansions on Abercorn Street to the servant quarters hidden behind them. It all started with a small notice in the Savannah Morning Republican on April 3, 1839, a short announcement easy to miss. A marriage license was issued to widow Elizabeth Thornton, age 42, and James Bennett, age 26. What the paper didn't mention was that James Bennett had, until recently, been considered property, not a person, on the Thornton plantation. The scandal that followed would tear apart not only the Thornton family, but would also uncover secrets long buried beneath the surface of Savannah's polite society. Elizabeth Thornton, born Elizabeth Montgomery, came from one of Georgia's oldest and wealthiest families. Her grandfather had arrived in the colony in 1733 with General Oglethorpe himself. Over generations, the Montgomerys grew rich from their rice plantations along the Savannah River, wealth earned through the labor of hundreds of enslaved people. Elizabeth was raised in comfort within the family's grand three-story home on Reynolds Square. Parish records from Christ Church Episcopal show that she married at 17 to Richard Thornton, a widower, 28 years her senior, who owned a large cotton plantation just outside the city. Their marriage united two of Georgia's most powerful families. Richard's first wife had died during childbirth, leaving behind a young son, William, who was only 5 years younger than his new stepmother. According to the Journal of Mary Bereni, a cousin who visited the plantation in the summer of 1826, the Thornton household was run with quiet precision. Mary wrote that Elizabeth seemed delicate, but ruled her home firmly, keeping strict order among the servants. Richard spoke little at meals, and when he did, a strange silence always followed. Those who knew the family said Richard was often away on business trips to Charleston or Augusta, leaving Elizabeth in charge of the estate. Few people realized how much time she spent with a house servant named Grace, listed in household records. Grace had arrived in 1822, purchased from a trader in Charleston. She was not alone. She had come with her young son, a boy of 9 named James. By 1835, tax documents from Chatham County listed 47 enslaved individuals on the Thornton plantation. Among them, James Bennett was noted as a house servant, one of only 4 with that title. Most others worked in the fields, their names reduced to numbers in inventory books. But James's name appeared often in household accounts, first as Grace's boy, then as simply James, and finally as James Bennett. The addition of a surname was rare and has puzzled historians for generations. Dr. Eleanor Hammond, who studied the Thornton papers in 1963 before they mysteriously vanished from the Georgia Historical Society archives, noted that James was taught to read and write, an extraordinary fact for someone in his position. In her manuscript Whispers from Reynolds Square, Hammond wrote that ledgers showed purchases of books, slates, and pencils specifically for JB's instruction. When Richard Thornton died in the yellow fever outbreak of 1836, his will left everything to Elizabeth and granted his son William a large inheritance. One clause stood out: "The servant James Bennett shall remain in the employ of my wife, and shall not be sold or transferred under any circumstances." Years later, this detail would become central to legal debates when the scandal erupted. Elizabeth observed exactly 1 year of mourning before appearing again in public. Neighbors noted that the estate continued running smoothly despite the master's death. During this time, witnesses began to notice things that raised suspicion. Margaret Habersham, a neighbor, later told investigators that she had seen Elizabeth and James walking together in the garden, like companions rather than mistress and servant. A former kitchen maid, Sarah Johnson, testified that she once entered the study without knocking and found them standing close together, James quickly pulling his hand away from Elizabeth's arm. "They jumped apart like they'd been burned," she said. "Mrs. Thornton sent me away quick, but her face was red like I'd never seen before." Seasons passed, winter to spring, spring to summer, and the house grew quieter. Elizabeth stopped attending social events. Her cousin Thomas Montgomery wrote in a letter that he visited her in early 1838 and found her changed, distracted, oddly cheerful, and dressed more simply than usual. He noted that James served them tea, and Elizabeth spoke to him with a familiarity that unsettled him. He wrote, "She said she had never felt more alive. There was something in her eyes I did not recognize, something that looked like secret joy." A series of urgent letters between William Thornton and his uncle, Judge Henry Thornton, began soon after. William wrote in December 1838 that he had received troubling reports about his stepmother's behavior and planned to visit the plantation unannounced. Judge Henry replied, urging caution, but warned that there have been whispers in certain circles. It would be wise to handle this privately before it becomes public scandal. William arrived at the plantation on January 15, 1839, during a cold rain. The next morning, the sheriff was summoned after what reports called a disturbance of serious nature. What happened that night was never fully recorded. All that is known is that William left before dawn and went directly to the sheriff's office. By noon, James Bennet had been arrested on charges that were later dismissed. Elizabeth was not arrested but was quietly told by church leaders to refrain from attending services for a period of reflection. 6 weeks later, silence turned to shock. The Savannah Morning Republican published a new notice, the marriage of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet. Somehow, Elizabeth had obtained legal freedom papers for James, and in an act of defiance, she married him in a private ceremony conducted by Reverend John Baker, a Methodist minister known for his abolitionist views. The ceremony took place not in a church but inside the Thornton home, witnessed only by Grace, James's mother, and a visiting lawyer from Philadelphia named Samuel Cooper. Records show Cooper stayed 2 nights in Savannah before traveling north, never returning to Georgia. The reaction to the marriage was immediate and brutal. The Savannah City Council held an emergency session on April 5, 1839, to address what they called a moral crisis threatening the structure of our society. William Thornton filed a petition declaring his stepmother mentally unfit and sought to take control of the estate. Judge Henry Thornton excused himself from the case due to family ties, but privately wrote to the governor asking for help. The Montgomery family publicly disowned Elizabeth, printing notices in newspapers across Georgia and South Carolina that she was no longer recognized as kin. Much of what followed has been pieced together from scattered accounts because many official records were deliberately destroyed, an effort, it seems, to erase the scandal. A letter found in 1954 during renovations of an old home on Broughton Street described what happened next. Written by someone who called himself a witness to infamy, it told how 12 men rode to the Thornton plantation on the night of April 10th. They surrounded the house carrying torches and demanded that Bennet come out to face justice, but it was the widow who appeared on the porch holding a shotgun. She said only, "This is my home and my choice. Leave now or face what comes." Her words, and the look in her eyes, made even the angriest among them hesitate. The men withdrew that night but returned 2 days later with the sheriff. They found the house deserted. Furniture was covered with sheets, as though everything had been packed away carefully, not abandoned in haste. In one small room off the library, once James's study, there was nothing left at all, not a single paper, book, or note. Sarah Johnson, the former maid, later said that Elizabeth had taught James to read and write there, and that they had spent many evenings in that room together. "They cleared it out completely," she said. not a thing left to show what had happened there all those years. The disappearance of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet launched what newspapers of the time called the Great Savannah Mystery. Rewards were offered and rumors spread across Georgia. Some said they fled north with the help of abolitionists. Others whispered they were lost at sea. And a few believed they still haunted the old plantation. No proof ever surfaced. Only silence and speculation remain, echoing through Savannah's history like a shadow that refuses to fade. It was carefully described as the largest search for missing persons in Chatham County's history. Ports were guarded, roads were checked, and nearby states were notified. William Thornton even brought in private detectives from as far away as New York to follow their trail. Yet despite all these efforts, no confirmed sighting was ever made. It seemed as if they had disappeared into the warm Georgia air. Still, rumors began to spread. A train station worker in Charleston said he had seen a white woman and a well-dressed black man boarding a northbound train. On the morning of April 11th, a ship captain in Wilmington, Delaware, told officials that he had carried a mixed-race couple to Boston in late April, though he could not be completely sure from the descriptions that it was them. Later that summer, a banker in Montreal, Canada, reported that a woman resembling Elizabeth had tried to withdraw money using papers from a Philadelphia lawyer named Samuel Cooper. As time passed and no answers came, the scandal slowly turned into something else. It became a whispered story, a warning told quietly to young women of good families. The Thornton estate soon fell into ruin. William Thornton, after finally gaining full legal control of the property in October 1839, sold it to a family from Virginia and never returned to Savannah. What became of the 46 enslaved people left behind was never clearly recorded, though a document found in the Chatham County archives shows that at least some of them were sold to a plantation in Alabama. Grace, the mother of James, was not listed among those sold. The investigation might have ended there, forgotten as an unsolved mystery, if not for what was discovered 5 years later. In 1844, when workers were fixing up the old Thornton house for its new owners, they found something unsettling hidden under the floorboards of the small study. Wrapped neatly in oilcloth was a leather-bound journal. The book was handed over to local officials and later came into the possession of Judge Henry Thornton, who reportedly read it all at once before locking it away in his private safe. 3 weeks later, the judge died from what doctors called apoplexy, a sudden stroke likely caused by extreme distress. The contents of the journal were never made public. After his death, his widow said she had burned the book without ever reading it, calling it a dangerous thing that carried corruption. Yet before its destruction, the judge's clerk, a young man named Thomas Wilberforce, later admitted that he had secretly copied certain parts. Wilberforce eventually moved to Boston, became active in abolitionist causes, and shared those copied passages with a Harvard researcher in 1861. The researcher's notes, discovered in Harvard's archives in 1958, stated that the journal belonged to Elizabeth Thornton and contained entries going back to 1822, the year Grace and her young son James first came to the plantation. The early entries showed Elizabeth's growing interest in the boy. "The child shows great intelligence," she wrote. "I may indulge my curiosity too much, but there is something in his eyes, a sharpness, a quick mind, that I have not seen in any other child, white or black. Today I showed him my book of pressed flowers, and he remembered each name after hearing it only once." Later pages told of Elizabeth's choice to secretly teach him to read, even after her husband had strictly forbidden it. "A would be furious if he knew, but what harm can come from learning? The boy soaks up every word I show him. He reminds me of myself when I was young, before they told me that a lady's lessons should only be about manners and charm, not knowledge." As the years passed, her writing became more personal. A page from 1830, when James was about 17, said, "I find myself waiting to see him in the mornings, watching the way the light touches his face as he works in the garden below my window. I tell myself it is pride, nothing more, but I fear it is something deeper, something I dare not name. By 1835, just before her husband's death, she wrote, "We spoke of poetry today. As he recited Byron, I no longer saw the boy I once taught, but the man he has become. I closed the book and sent him away. Later I cried, though I do not know why. The most revealing passages, according to the Harvard notes, came after Richard Thornton's death. With R gone, the house feels different. Jay and I walked through the garden at dusk, talking about the fields. For the first time I asked what he thought, not out of politeness, but because I truly wanted to know. Our hands touched while we looked at a damaged camellia bloom. Neither of us spoke of it, yet neither of us moved away. Later, we stopped pretending. When the house is quiet and the doors locked, he comes to the library. We read and talk, and I feel seen in a way I never imagined possible. He understands my heart more than anyone ever has. I've started asking about laws in other states. There must be a place where we can live without fear. The last copied entry was dated March 30th, 1839, only days before their marriage announcement appeared in the paper. Tomorrow, everything changes. Sam Cooper has secured the papers. Once the ceremony is complete, we must go at once. Jay fears for his mother, but she insists on staying for now, to keep up appearances until we are settled. I have sewn what jewelry and money I could into our clothes. The northern friends Sam introduced me to have prepared safe houses along our route. I know the risk, but for the first time in my life, I am choosing my own path. The Harvard researcher added a curious note. Wilberforce claimed that in 1852, while visiting Montreal, he met a woman he believed to be Elizabeth Thornton. She lived under another name in a quiet neighborhood of mixed families. When he approached her, she denied being Elizabeth but invited him for tea. During their talk, she mentioned poetry, specifically Byron, which reminded him of the journal. Before leaving, he noticed a portrait on her wall of a black man dressed formally. When he asked about it, she smiled and said, "My late husband. He passed 3 years ago." Wilberforce never reported the meeting. Over time, the Thornton scandal slipped from public memory, buried under the growing national tension that would soon lead to war. The plantation changed hands twice before it was mostly destroyed during Sherman's march to the sea in 1864. The land was later divided and developed. Today, a housing area stands where the old house once stood, and few living there know what history lies beneath their feet. The Thornton name survives only in a small side street near Abercorn and in the Georgia Historical Society archives, where researchers sometimes find pieces of the story by accident. In 1957, during the building of a shopping center near the old plantation site, workers dug up a small metal box about 3 feet underground. Inside were a cameo brooch, a pressed camellia between glass, and a folded note tied with a lock of hair. The items were sent to the Georgia Historical Society, where they sat unrecorded until 1963. That year, Dr. Ellen Hammond studied them as part of her research into the Thornton mystery. She noted that the cameo matched one from Elizabeth Thornton's wedding records. The pressed flower was a rare type of camellia bred on the plantation, and the hair seemed to come from 2 different people intertwined together. Dr. Hammond never published her findings. Colleagues said she became obsessed, convinced that more evidence was hidden. In spring 1963, she traveled to Montreal to follow up on the Wilberforce story. She wrote to her department chair that she had made an important discovery and would return with proof that would change Georgia's history. 2 weeks later, her hotel room was found empty and her notes were missing. The only thing left was a single pressed camellia placed on her pillow. 3 days later, she was found in a hospital, confused and unable to recall what had happened or where her research had gone. After that, She gave up the Thornton case and refused to speak of it again until her death in 1968. Now, the story of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet exists somewhere between real history and legend. Parts can be verified through court papers, newspapers, and letters. Other parts remain uncertain, built from fragments, rumors, and quiet gaps in the record. What is certain is that in the spring of 1839, a wealthy white widow and a black man she once owned under Georgia law vanished together. They left behind a shocked society, not only because of the broken racial rules, but because their closeness seemed to have developed over years, perhaps even while her husband was still alive, within a home that represented Southern order itself. The true mystery is not just what became of them after they disappeared, but what took place before. What happened in the still hours of teaching and learning, in talks over books, in glances across rooms where others saw only mistress and servant. What words were spoken, what promises made. And most troubling of all, to those who later learned of it, how many other homes hid stories like theirs behind calm and proper walls? How many other lives crossed the forbidden lines that society worked so hard to keep? After Dr. Hammond's death, a graduate student sorting through her belongings discovered a sealed envelope with a note requesting that it not be opened until 50 years after her passing. The university administration, worried about possible legal issues, ignored this instruction and chose to open it in the presence of lawyers. A staff member who was there, but asked to remain anonymous when interviewed in 1972, said that the envelope held a single sheet of paper. On it was an address in Montreal and the words, "They survived, they lived, their descendants walk among us still." The paper was reportedly taken by university officials and has never been made public. The address, according to that same witness, led to a cemetery. Even today, the story of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet appears now and then in academic discussions, in specialized studies of antebellum Southern society, and in quiet stories told during ghost tours of Savannah's historic district. Tour guides often point to a certain house on Reynolds Square, not the original Thornton home, but one nearby, and claim that on particular nights, especially in April, a faint light can be seen drifting from one room to another, as if someone were searching for something or someone. Others have said they've heard a soft voice reciting poetry, though the words are never clear. These tales are, of course, tourist embellishments, stories created to fascinate visitors, but there's no real proof behind them. What remains certain is this. In 1839, Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet chose each other in a world that forbade such a choice. Rather than surrender to separation, they vanished. Somewhere, perhaps in a forgotten archive, an old trunk in an attic, or hidden beneath a modern building, there may still lie a clue to what happened after they disappeared from the written record and into legend. Until something new is uncovered, their story remains one of Savannah's most haunting and thought-provoking chapters. Not because of ghosts or violence, but because it questioned the very structure of the society they lived in. It showed how fragile those social rules truly were, and how far people were willing to go either to preserve or to challenge them. As one Harvard researcher who studied Wilberforce's notes once said, "The most unsettling thing about the Thornton case is not what it tells us about the two individuals themselves, but what it hints about the many others whose stories never reached paper, those whose courage went unseen, whose voices were silenced, whose lives were wiped from memory. How many Elizabeth Thorntons and James Bennets lived and died across the American South, their struggles buried with them? What does it reveal about a society that worked so hard to make sure such stories would never come to light?" These questions still echo through Savannah's moss-covered squares, along the quiet riverbanks, and in the spaces between history's written lines. In 1972, during the renovation of an old colonial post office building in Schenectady, New York, workers found a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the basement wall. Inside was a small leather pouch containing 3 letters addressed to Mrs. Jane Bennet at an Albany address. The letters, dated from 1841 to 1843, were written in an elegant flowing hand and signed only with the initial G. Historians later identified the writer as likely being Grace James Bennet's mother, who was believed to have stayed behind in Georgia after Elizabeth and James fled. The letters didn't directly mention Savannah or the scandal, but they spoke of a shared acquaintance who had moved north and was eager for news from home. The most revealing line appeared in the 3rd letter, dated December 18, 1843. Our mutual friend asks after you often. Things here have grown harder since your departure. The new master is cruel. Many have been sold away. I still keep the secret you entrusted to me, though there are those who continue to question me. The item you left in my care is still safe where we agreed. When my time comes, I hope to join you in a place where people may live by their hearts rather than by the commands of others. These letters were important not only for what they said, but because they existed at all. They hinted that Grace might have eventually escaped north, contrary to official records claiming she died on the Thornton plantation in 1840. More importantly, they suggested there had been a continuing line of communication, a secret network that allowed messages to travel between Georgia and New York, despite efforts to erase all connections between Elizabeth, James, and their past lives. More evidence of this network appeared in 1959, when a historian researching the Underground Railroad found account books belonging to Samuel Cooper, a Philadelphia lawyer who had witnessed Elizabeth and James's marriage. These books, uncovered in the archives of a Quaker meeting house in Pennsylvania, contained coded entries later interpreted as financial records supporting various routes used by enslaved people seeking freedom. One entry, dated June 5, 1839, noted, "Special arrangement for TNB package delivered safely to Montreal. Additional funds released as agreed for 5 years of protection and silence." Dr. Marcus Williams, who studied these ledgers before they were classified and restricted from public view in 1962, wrote in his private notes, "The Cooper accounts indicate that the Thornton-Bennett escape was not a sudden act of rebellion, but a carefully designed plan that may have taken years to prepare. The level of funding, enough to ensure 5 years of safety and secrecy, suggests not only significant resources but remarkable planning." One must wonder when Elizabeth Thornton first began plotting her escape from Savannah society. Was it after her husband's death or long before? This question became even more intriguing in 1964, when construction workers tearing down an old rice mill near the original Thornton estate discovered a small hidden space beneath the floorboards. Inside was a wooden chest containing what looked like teaching materials: a primer, a slate, several pencils, and a copy of Byron's collected poems. Experts dated these items to the 1820s or early 1830s, before Richard Thornton's death. Most interesting of all was a small notebook filled with handwriting practice, the same sentence repeated over and over in improving penmanship. "I am James Bennet. I am a man. I have a mind." At the bottom of that page, in different handwriting believed to be Elizabeth's, were the words, "Excellent progress. You have earned your name today." The find suggested that Elizabeth had been secretly teaching James while her husband was still alive. The rice mill, according to plantation records, was rarely used after 1825, when newer machines were built closer to the main fields. That made it the perfect hiding place for secret lessons, far enough from the main house to avoid suspicion, but not so distant as to raise questions about Elizabeth's absence. What no one has been able to determine is when or how their relationship changed from teacher and student into something deeper. No documents directly confirm this connection before Richard Thornton's death. Yet a letter Elizabeth wrote to her cousin Anne Montgomery on October 18, 1834, 2 years before she became a widow, contains a cryptic passage that many believe alludes to it. "I live 2 lives now, one that the world sees, where I play my part as expected, and another made up of moments stolen from the day, conversations that must never be overheard, thoughts I dare not speak. It is in that hidden life that I feel most truly alive. Is it not strange to feel most real when one must hide the most?" The double life Elizabeth described became much harder to sustain after her husband's passing. As a widow, she would have faced increased scrutiny, especially regarding her handling of the plantation and those she now owned outright. Several contemporary accounts noted changes in her demeanor. Margaret Williams, a neighbor who recorded her thoughts in a private diary found in 1957, wrote in September 1836, "Visited Elizabeth Thornton 6 months after her husband's death. She seems different in a way I can't quite explain. There is a restless energy about her that doesn't match her mourning attire." When I mentioned how difficult it must be to manage such a large estate alone, she smiled oddly and said, "I am not as alone as you might think." I left feeling uneasy, as though I had seen something not meant to be seen. As more people began to notice Elizabeth's unusual behavior, James Bennet's role in the household also shifted. Witnesses later said that by early 1838, James had taken on responsibilities far beyond what was typical for someone in his position. The kitchen maid, Sarah Johnson, told investigators that he was managing the plantation accounts, meeting visitors when Elizabeth was unavailable, and even writing to merchants in Savannah on behalf of the estate. "He sat at the master's desk," she said, "used the master's pen, spoke with the master's confidence, and Mrs. Elizabeth, she only smiled, like she knew exactly what she was doing. It seemed the most natural thing in the world. This slow change in roles, this soft blurring of the strict boundaries that ruled Southern society, could not go on forever without bringing consequences." The turning point, as already mentioned, came with William Thornton's unexpected visit in January 1839. What exactly he saw is still uncertain, but in a letter he sent to Judge Henry Thornton right after fleeing the estate, he described it as a disturbance of natural order so deep that he could not stay under that roof another hour without fearing he might lose control. He said he found Elizabeth and James in a situation that left no room for an innocent explanation, though he avoided sharing clear details out of respect for the family name. What happened right after William's discovery started a series of events that would finally lead to Elizabeth and James's marriage and later disappearance. What fewer people know is that in the 3 months between that visit and their wedding, Elizabeth began quietly selling off her property and moving her wealth. Records at the Bank of Savannah show that between January 20th and March 15th, 1839, she withdrew large sums of money, changing them into portable forms like banknotes and letters of credit. She also sold several pieces of jewelry through a broker in Charleston, proven by a receipt found among Samuel Cooper's papers. The most interesting part is that she transferred ownership of a small property she had inherited in Philadelphia to a company with Cooper as its only trustee. These actions make it clear that Elizabeth was preparing not just to run away, but to begin an entirely new life beyond Georgia. The careful legal planning, done through other people and across state borders, shows she fully understood the challenges ahead. She and James needed not only to escape but also to build new identities in a place where their pasts could not reach them, where they could live freely without fear of being discovered or shunned. The strongest proof of these preparations appears in a statement from 1841 by a former clerk at a Savannah print shop. During a court dispute over William Thornton's claim to his stepmother's estate, the clerk said that in February 1839, a well-dressed black man, later identified as James Bennet, had ordered business cards and stationery for a Mr. James Bennett, importer of fine teas and spices, with an address in Montreal. Bennett told the clerk he was handling this for his employer, who was expanding trade in the north. The clerk did not think much of it then, but later realized what it meant once the scandal spread. Those business cards were not just a disguise. They showed the life Elizabeth and James had imagined together, one where he would be not a servant, but a businessman, not property, but a respected man of trade. The choice of Montreal was clever. As part of British Canada, it stood far from American laws about runaway slaves. Its diverse population offered a kind of safety, and its position as a major trading city made a tea and spice business perfectly believable. The details of their journey from Savannah to Montreal remain mostly unknown, though bits and pieces suggest they traveled by ship to Philadelphia, where Cooper sheltered them briefly and provided new identity papers. From there, they went north through New York and crossed into Canada. Among Cooper's belongings, there was a receipt for passage on the schooner Mary Jane from Savannah to Philadelphia, dated April 12, 1839. It listed two travelers, Mrs. E. Smith and Mr. J. Smith, described as aunt and nephew on family business. What seems certain is that by August of that year, someone matching Elizabeth's description tried to access funds in Montreal. Later that same year, city directories recorded a James Bennett importer with a small shop on Rue St. Paul and a home on Rue Antoine. The following year added a Mrs. Jane Bennett at the same address. No mention was made of their race or origin. Life in Montreal would have brought different struggles. Though they escaped the danger of Southern law, they had to build believable stories about their past. Elizabeth's accent, their appearance, and their manners would all have to fit the roles they created. Their business's success would depend not only on skill, but also on how well they could appear as who they claimed to be. From what remains, they seem to have managed well. Records from the port of Montreal show Bennett's tea and spice business had steady activity through the 1840s. Tax papers show slow but sure improvement, and by 1845 they had moved to a larger shop. Church records from a small Methodist congregation note regular attendance and donations from Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, described as a couple of mixed background, vague enough to avoid curiosity. The most personal glimpse of their Montreal life comes from the diary of a young woman named Marie Leblanc, who worked in their shop from 1843 to 1845. Found in 1966, her journal contains notes about her employers. Madame Bennett speaks French with an American accent, she wrote, but tries very hard to improve. She is always graceful, even in simple clothes, and treats everyone kindly, from wealthy customers to poor vendors. Mr. Bennett runs the shop carefully, and they seem quietly devoted to each other. They share looks when they think no one is watching, small signs of understanding that make me wish for the same one day. In another entry, Marie wrote, "A customer from Boston asked Mr. Bennett about his past. He said he had grown up in the South but preferred the air of Canada, both weather and society. The man then asked if Madame Bennett was of European descent. A silence filled the shop. Mr. Bennett smiled and said, 'My wife and I have found Montreal asks fewer questions, which is exactly why we chose it.' The man soon left, but Madame Bennett's hands trembled as she arranged the tea canisters, though she acted as if nothing had happened. This moment showed how fragile their safety was. Even in their new home, a single curious visitor from the South could have exposed them. This constant risk likely led them to sell their business in 1849 and move to a quieter town outside Montreal. Their old shop was bought by a French-Canadian trader, and their home address disappeared from city lists. From then on, the record grows thin. No proof survives of James Bennett's supposed death from pneumonia around 1849, as told by Thomas Wilberforce after meeting Elizabeth, though death records from that period are unreliable, especially outside big cities. What can be confirmed is that in 1852, a year Wilberforce said he met Elizabeth, a Mrs. Jane Bennet, widow, bought a small house in St. Henri, then a separate town west of Montreal. The property stayed in her name until 1867, when it passed to a Miss Grace Bennet, listed as her niece and only heir. Grace's appearance raises questions. There is no record of Elizabeth and James having or adopting a child, but the name Grace matches that of James's mother. Could she have been James's mother who had found her way north, or a daughter born to the couple and named after her grandmother? The second seems more likely, supported by a church record noting the confirmation in 1860 of a Grace Bennet, age 14, which would place her birth around 1846, 7 years after the flight from Savannah. If true, this means their story was not only one of a forbidden union, but also of a family built across barriers of race and class that defined 19th century America. Somewhere, there may still be descendants of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet, unaware of the remarkable courage and hope that shaped their ancestors' lives. The last known trace of Elizabeth appears in 1869, 30 years after her scandal shook Savannah. A notice in a Montreal paper announced the death of Mrs. Jane Bennet, formerly of the United States, aged 72. The short obituary said she was survived by her beloved granddaughter and remembered for her quiet strength, her love of poetry, and her belief that all souls are equal before God. She was buried in a small cemetery in St. Henri, in a grave she had purchased years before. Beside it was another grave, unmarked except for the years 1822-1849, the likely span of James Bennet's life. In 1963, when Dr. Eleanor Hammond traveled to Montreal following Wilberforce's notes, she reportedly visited that cemetery. Whatever discovery she made vanished along with her research papers during her mysterious 3-day absence. By 1970, the cemetery was relocated for city development, and the graves were moved without individual markers, erasing the last physical link to their story. All that remains are fragments scattered in archives across Georgia, New York, Pennsylvania, and Quebec. Testimonies spoken long after the events, objects found under floors or behind walls, lines in diaries and letters never meant for the world. From these pieces, we can trace the outline of something extraordinary, a quiet act of defiance against the boundaries of race and status. What stays unclear is not what Elizabeth and James did, but who they truly were to each other. When did teacher and student become equals? When did respect become something deeper? What promises were whispered in secret rooms? What gave them the strength to imagine a life everyone said was impossible? These unanswered questions fill the spaces between the surviving records. They echo through Savannah's history, unsettling its polished image of the Old South. The story of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet offers no neat ending, no simple lesson. It reminds us of the many untold stories buried beneath official accounts, the quiet rebellions, the secret understandings, the human hearts that refused to fit the lines drawn for them. As one Harvard researcher later wrote, "What makes the Thornton affair so haunting is not that it happened, but that it makes us wonder how many others did too. If a woman of Elizabeth's status could risk everything for such a bond, how many others felt the same but lacked her courage or means? The real history of human connection across the divides of class and color in America remains mostly unwritten, existing only in fragments, whispers, and silence." In 1969, the same year Dr. Hammond's sealed envelope was opened, an elderly woman visited the Georgia Historical Society asking for any materials about the Thornton plantation. The archivist described her as well-dressed, in her 70s, with light brown skin and gray eyes. She spent hours reading the records, taking notes. When asked about her interest, she said she was tracing her family roots. As she left, she stopped at the display case holding the cameo brooch and pressed flower found in 1957. She stood quietly for a long moment, then smiled, not sadly, but as though remembering something from long ago. She touched the glass lightly and said, "Some stories are better left untold, but that doesn't make them any less true." She never returned, and her name was never recorded. Like so much of this story, she remains another fragment, another echo from a past that refuses to disappear. In the end, perhaps this is what makes the Thornton Bennett story so powerful: the endurance of human connection, the refusal of love in any form to obey the rules society builds around it. In a world that declared certain feelings impossible, Elizabeth and James created a small space for themselves, first in secret, then in exile, and finally in memory. Even today, the fragments they left behind can still move us. In Savannah, on certain April nights when the air is thick with jasmine and memory, guides still point to Reynolds Square and speak softly of the widow who defied her world. Some say they see lights in old windows, hear faint poetry recited, feel a sudden chill in the warm air. They are just stories told to entertain visitors seeking a touch of mystery, but beneath them lies a deeper truth. The past is never as simple as we wish it were. Human hearts have always refused to be contained, and perhaps somewhere the descendants of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennett still walk among us, carrying within them a quiet legacy of courage and defiance that time itself could not erase.